Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. My name is Cameron Bell. I am your host on your extra show, and what a show I've got for you. Because after 103 days after Philippe Clement left the building today, Rangers announced the arrival of head coach Russell Martyn, here to talk to me about all of that, as he was at Ibrox earlier on for the presser, and to get his takeaway from the Russell Martyn unveiling is my very good friend, Martyn Ramsey. Martyn, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a busy wee Rangers-related day for you.
Busy Rangers-related day, busy week, really. Seems like so much has been crammed into the last 7 days. So, yeah, plenty to talk about.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that, because I think we all knew, listen, let's be honest, the takeover has been the worst kept secret in Glasgow for about the last 6 months. And I think the more sensible among us knew that that was going to probably delay the managerial announcement coming in, and that's where I started to get a wee bit concerned when I was hearing timescales of the takeover completing towards the tail end of June. Thankfully, it was completed last week, and within a few, what have felt probably pretty long days rather than short days, we now have a new manager, or head coach. I need to keep the terminology correct. So it's been done and dusted. There's obviously been work happening in the background, and for me, these things, they have to go sequentially. It has been a busy week in the life of Rangers, but I'm delighted that it's happened, because I was beginning to drown in all the noise of the speculation about who it was going to be, even when it came down to the straight shootout between Ancelotti and Martyn. It was just getting a bit too much for me. I was just wanting it to happen just to kind of get moving. Tell me a little bit about your experience at Ibrox this morning. You were there covering it with Davey for Heart and Hand. Keen to kind of get your takeaways from it.
I'll do that in a minute, but I would agree that I think we've all felt just a wee bit weary. Most of that's just to do with living on social media, by the way. Things like this did used to take some time back in the day, but you read what you read in the newspaper, whatever was on the news bulletins at tea time, and then just got on with your life. So there's maybe a bit of that. I agree, again, with the sequential nature of it. In terms of announcements, it was always going to be this way: takeover, farewell, starting, and then the manager. That doesn't mean, Cammy, that they couldn't have had an agreement in place before announcing after the takeover, and they didn't. They hadn't made their decision. That process was still ongoing as of last Friday, when the takeover was announced. So there was still work to do. There was still decisions to be made. I think you're talking about the shootout there. I think if Rangers wanted Ancelotti, they would have him, and that would have been done a wee while ago. Maybe again with the announcement delayed. I don't think they were sure about something. There's the unknown there, and they've made the decision they've made. We can't really complain about the thoroughness, because we've complained about maybe rush jobs before. Different circumstances, Cammy, mid-season, the last 3 managers, and you've kind of got to make that turnaround in an international break. So the fact that they have been thorough, they're very, very sure about the process. They talked today. I think everyone aligned with the club, so that the ownership and those obviously making the decision are all pretty much on the same page with respect to the process, and those making the decisions were left to make those decisions, and we'll see how that pans out in the coming days. Takeaways today, that it was a wee bit more low-key than some of the recent ones. The presser was not in the Blue Room. The unveiling was, so those initial pictures and that kind of film, shaking hands, all that stuff. And then everyone was brought back down for the press conference in, to be fair, the press room. That's what it's built for. It's, the sound's a lot better. It's all done for any kind of press conversation that's taking place at Ibrox Stadium. Obviously, Auchenhouse configured in the same way. So a wee bit of a change of tone there. Less fanfare, maybe a wee bit less hubris than we've maybe seen with others, and I don't necessarily think that's the worst thing. It's done. Here are the reasons why. We've got loads of work to do. Let's do it. So that's the kind of tone. As you know, we've been here too often in the last few years. What's this? The fourth in less than 3 years. I've come away from it feeling better than I did going. But again, I was the same with Beals. So it's not like you get hoodwinked by the language and some of the jargon and patter and cliche that's there. It's you want the best, right? As a fan, you want it to work. Well, some want it to work. Touch on social media in a minute, but yeah, there were things that I wanted to hear and did hear, and you always obviously feel a wee bit more assured when you feel that someone's maybe on the right tracks that we've not been on before. And I think he's quite a grounded guy, Cammy. I think he's clearly an intelligent guy. I think he really does still smart a wee bit about how the Southampton thing ended. The narrative around his time there, I don't think, well, he certainly is of the belief they were nowhere near as binary and it's kind of black and white as was made out by David and I on Seagulls and Jack, to be fair. But he felt there was a lot more to it than that. There's been a lot more to it over his career. So I think he does rail against that a wee bit. He understands, I think Farewell spoke similarly, that there are effectively 3 games that Rangers have to play. Europe, Celtic and the rest. And there needs to be some variation in approach while still having those principles of aggression, dominant on the ball, dominant off it, that kind of intensity and athleticism. We've heard a lot of this before, but he probably is more committed to that identity than certainly the last 3. Certainly Gio and Clement, who maybe wanted to shift around maybe too much at times. So yeah, it's obviously going to be interesting as to how it all falls into place. But listen, we can argue the toss, and we will argue the toss as time goes on. He has a very clear way about how he wants to go, with some room for variation. How much room we will see. It's good that a Rangers coach has a plan, and that plan fits into the overall structure, which again I think is more important than anything else. If he's recruited well, if he's resourced well, I think he'll be fine. I think he'll be all right. We will be better than we've been. If he's not, then like the others before him, they're on to hiding because the players don't fit. Players have not been good enough. I think there's an understanding that Rangers needs a leadership core that's not been there. It needs experience, and I think that's music to my ears, certainly. But my final kind of takeaway, Cam, before we get into whatever you want to talk about in detail, is that I think I have definitely been guilty, and I think the fans have been guilty, of just being too high and too low on these days, these unveiling days, and projecting all this onto one guy. It's not doable. It is not sustainable in the modern world, where it's just constant noise and a big club like Rangers in the modern world. It is about the overall structure, and it's more importantly about players. Recruitment hasn't been good enough. We all know that. It's one of the big hopes, big beliefs that we have about the new regime, that this is going to be a lot better, and it'll obviously have to be. But it's not about Russell Martyn any more than it was about Philip Clement, to be honest. It's about everybody in the one direction and working towards the same things in the same way.
Well, yeah, it's interesting that you finish up on that point, because something that I wanted to mention was on our Patreon site, we had a poll up a couple of days ago, and I always like to think our community in Heart and Hands, a good tester for some common sense approach, and we put up a poll to say, whether this was prior to the confirmed announcement, of course, whether or not people were behind it. Now, there was 2,657 votes in that poll. 5% of that said that they were right behind him. 41% said they were neutral. We'll see how it goes. And 54% said it was not for me. Now, I'll be honest with you, I think that dial has now shifted because, as you say about people pulling together, I do think that this, and I don't think I'm kind of understating it in terms of some of the hysteria that we've seen. And yes, it's in message board forums and social media and WhatsApp chats and everything. Has been frantic. And not only do I think that's been because of, as I say, Fleet Clermont leaving so long ago, as it feels like now, but I also think that there's a hangover effect from those managers that you mentioned, Gio, Beale, etc., being able to come in. And now that we have someone in place, I'm pretty confident that some of those who were not overly enamoured at the idea of Russell Martyn being able to come in will now start to kind of get in line and be able to fall in behind them. And I'm conscious, and I'd love to ask you this. I'm wondering if he's been aware of any of that, if he's been aware of any of that noise, if you got any impression from him that he's got an awareness of.
100% he is. And he was quite candid in the main presser earlier to say that he wasn't first choice
for any job.
From the fans, that they had other names in the frame that they preferred. He knows the score. I think he's had a life and a career. I think he was always kind of told he was very limited as a player, and certainly Rangers fans may agree with that from his short time here. But he's made a career, right? I think he made more of his footballing career than he ever imagined he would. He always saw this as his kind of route. That's really what he wanted to do. He does feel quite acutely, I think, that he maybe wasn't in the best shape when he was here, and therefore didn't give, the kind of best version of himself, I think is the words he used. So he has that to try and prove. So I think he's a guy who's always been used to railing against the odds and the tide and the general narrative around him. So that is nothing new. He understands that. He gets that. And so do Thelwell and Patrick Stewart. They know that there was again, I'm reading between the lines here because I think they just felt it was maybe too much of a risk of the unknown with Ancelotti. That, again, that's just my take from outside. That in footballing terms, that was too much of a risk. And to be honest, I would agree. I'm kind of fed up of people coming here to cut their teeth. It's too big a club to do that. But the media, the PR, the general vibes thing, this is by far the biggest risk is taking Martyn. They know what they want, and he answered their questions better than anyone else, like any other process. And they've stuck to it. When it would have been the easy option to say, well, the fans really quite like this other guy. That's a free hit for us. We can say we were bold and we were adventurous and we were ambitious. And we can also say, well, you wanted them as well. They're going against that because they feel, no, this is who we want. We've gone through the process. No one else has. And we're here to do a job, and that's our decision. Cast your minds back to Clermont's appointment. Lampard was dangled out there to test the waters, and those waters were not good. And the decision was reversed. I'm almost certain of that. That was a club and an ownership who I think at times were terrified of the support. And I just think we're in different waters here. I completely understand why people would be less than enthused. I think the correct answer is that middle one, Cammy, to be honest. Here we go. So I think they've taken a real gamble here. You can like it or not. If you don't, you'll go to bed without supper. We don't care. We're going with this. We're the ones tasked with this, and let's go. And, two things. He's likely going to be up against it from the start. Rangers have got a huge turnover to manage this summer. And that at any club. We know from experience, even in good places when you've just got a big squad cycle to manage, that can be hard to get right quickly. So the likelihood is that there will be bumps early on, which means there'll be unbelievable noise around this club that they're going to have to kind of manage. And also with the Ancelotti thing in the frame, Ancelotti is a blank canvas upon which Rangers fans will project the best outcome. So if it does start tentatively, if it does start in a kind of rocky fashion, that's what's going to be compared. Everyone's dreams as fact. This is what would have happened if we'd gone here, when no one knows that. So I think they're taking a risk. I think they're being bold, but in a weird way, Cammy, I'm happier with that. If that's their guy, do it and back him when things do get wild, or if things do get wild, because that's something we have not seen in recent times. That's why we're here for the fourth time in less than 3 years. And I do believe that I think the club is in kind of different hands in that regard. They will not be swayed by the online life.
Well, that's something that David Allen and I spoke about on Monday's flagship, where we were talking about a previous board that I think wanted to be popular, and that was almost the raison d'etre. And
They were fans, Cammy.
yeah, and I get it, and understand why, but I also understand how it went the way it went. And I think that's when you've got guys making footballing decisions who shouldn't be making football decisions, to be honest with you. What's interesting on what I've kind of said previously as well, Martyn, that I get, as we've just discussed, why this can feel a little bit deja vu, because we've suffered it far more than we should have in recent times. But I'm looking at it from a different set of circumstances, because the situation now is totally different to any, again, of the names that we've just mentioned. Even if you want to go as far back as Warburton, for example, where there's a far better structure in place. They've got commitment to make improvements where we've not been able to address that before. And I'm hoping that it will make Russell Martin's life a little bit easier. But as you've mentioned there, he's got a huge workload on that he has to be able to deal with. We'll touch on the players and kind of recruitment in just a moment. But again, like I say, he's coming into a house with a better foundation is probably the best way that I could put it.
Than Warburton?
Well,
Gerrard? I mean, but definitely. But it's still... It's not the one that Gio walked into, or even Biel or Clement, I don't think. It's we'll have to, and they'll have to exist within reality, obviously, and there will be boundaries there. There'll be players that will just need to stay because no one will take them off our hands. There will be players who they might envisage going out the door who may surprise. I think he talked about that in the main presser as well, that he might be no different to any other manager coming into a new club and think, I don't really fancy him, but actually, seeing him day by day is different from afar. So there may be a wee bit of that, but ideally, in an ideal world, you probably just rip this whole thing apart, to be honest, and be left with very few. That's probably not going to happen, even though the turnover's still going to be pretty huge. So it is a huge job, but he is coming in a wee bit like, well, I felt Gerrard was kind of asked to run that, not himself because Mark Allen was there, but Gerrard was the king, right? And that's not the way this model should go. And I think everyone kind of come in at the same time, knowing the roles, knowing how this thing should work, should be to the benefit. But again, that's all dependent on recruitment. All of this is dependent on recruitment.
I wonder if that has been part of the discussions as we've been going through our due diligence with presumably both candidates. But my hope was always going to be that whomever was offered the job and decided to take it, recruitment was a huge part of the conversation, because you don't need to be inside the club to be able to see where there has to be that turnover. And I've mentioned previously as well, when we've been talking about this summer and how huge it is, because I can't remember the last time when a summer wasn't huge for us, but that's the cliche book being used. It's not going to happen in the next 7 weeks to be able to get us to where we need to get to for a sustained period. I know that we're talking about figures that were bandied about from last Friday around, £20 million investment, etc. But, as you well know, that £20 million can go real quick. And what we're talking about now and where we're aiming to be able to try and get to is, if we are spending that level of money, is spending it better than we have done in previous years. And that, again, is probably what gives me that degree of comfort, that it won't be down to one man. It won't be down to, the sign-off coming from one guy, if it is like a Gerrard, for example, of, he makes the final call. It's now more based on a unilateral decision. And hopefully Russell Martyn has come in and said, I know what I think I need, but we need to have discussions around the entire squad, because, as you say, there'll be players that will still be here after the summer break.
Yeah, so there's probably a couple of things. I'm still surprised that the 20 million thing is still kind of flying around as the absolute max, and obviously not all of that's going to be on players. Rangers would have money to spend just from revenue and player sales. We will sell players this summer, some of which will make us a few bob. So it's clearly that's additional funding to that. So I still think I'd be surprised if we're not spending close to or over what we've ever spent in one summer. Not, transfer windows obviously weren't the thing. Smith's last season, first time, and that first Advocate year, for example. But in one kind of summer goal. But we'll wait and see on that. Thirlwell spoke after with fan media on the record. Thirlwell and Patrick Stewart. The manager spoke with us. It was more an off the record chat, so obviously can't disclose that. But again, felt better after having that conversation than I did before. But certainly, clearly Kevin Thirlwell did not really start on Monday. Started officially, but he'd done a lot of work before then. And obviously, as part of that process of interviewing and selecting the manager, they had conversations. I'm sure he had conversations with other candidates, perhaps, around what needed to be done, what they would like to do, where they felt the priorities were. Those conversations are going to be top level, and he kind of confirmed today, now's the time for him and Russell to sit down and say, right, let's drill in here. Here are the profiles we have. Here are the kind of options we have. Where are the priorities, and really start to go. So obviously, it is not a case of, right, we're both in employment now. As of today, let's start thinking about players. That process is well and trained.
Yeah, and I think, you're right, obviously, about Thirlwell. You could see how quickly things started to move, even, I think, the day before he officially took the role, and you saw Niles Coppin leaving. I think it's the right thing to do. I think that, when we were in February, March kind of time, and we started to project towards the summer and what changes had to happen, etc., we obviously want it done as quickly as possible, but you have to marry that with the degree of due diligence that we've been speaking about. And whether or not it's going to be the £20 million figure that may be supplemented by player sales will be interesting, because we are merely weeks away from European qualifiers starting to come around. I think for me, the litmus test is going to come in terms of the business that we're going to be doing from player trading across the course of, I would say, the next 7 to 14 days. That, I think, will be an indicator of how much work has been getting done in the background to either see players leave, see players come in. We can't, push business too far down the road. We have to be able to work into the market. But at the same point, this is where we really don't have time to languish.
Yeah, I get all that. I don't know. I don't know the absolute inside detail on that. It wouldn't surprise me if some of those bigger sales took a wee while, because they tend to do. But we'll have plans anyway. So 7 to 14 days, I'm not entirely sure. I'm entirely sure when the window opens again, because it's kind of open for a wee bit for the Club World Cup lads, and then shut again, and then so we've got to remember it's this 5th of June. I know Europe comes around quickly and all of that, but nor do I want Rangers to be, furiously rushing into anything. Groundwork's done as far as we're aware, and it's not a question of, right, well, we press that button and make that happen immediately. Still somewhat to be done on deals, I'm sure. So, yeah, I think it might take a wee bit longer than we expect, but I honestly can't remember when that window opens again. But I'm sure it's not for a wee bit. So, players aren't back to the 23rd of June anyway, and yeah, it's just going to take how long it needs to take, and I'm sure there will be X priority and then Y priority, and then it'll be, well, if we do progress levels in Europe, we know that budget's there. Can we then do some other deals? Yeah, I wish it was all done in a week in secret for every club in the world, and they just announced what happened, and we just come back on the 1st of August, and
That's your squad.
That's your players until January, and we can do away with the whole yellow ticker culture, because it just eats you alive. But as I said, I think we're dealing with people who know what they're doing, who are proactive and are kind of ready to really get the foot down and go to that next stage. But the deals obviously have to be right, and we just came in a situation, Cammy, where we're having panic buys, and you're spending, let's say, for example, over £3 million on a player at the very last minute of deadline day who probably doesn't suit what you need every week.
Well, I think that's where it comes into, failing to get option A means that you get option B, and it's a little bit square peg round hole, which we have spent so much money, wasted so much money on in the last few years, because we've bought players in to try and fit a system which either doesn't suit them or they don't suit it. But it's just been the case of being able to try and bring in fresh bodies, and it's not worked. And it is really, spending good money after bad. But I think that this is where it will be interesting to see what Russell Martyn thinks. I've got zero doubt that he's going to end up speaking to quite a few of the players before they do report back for pre-season, of course. There's obviously a lot of focus on the captain and whether or not he keeps him. What I think will be interesting will be how Russell Martyn manages that, because there's a part of me that wonders, for sentimental reasons, does he decide to give James Tavernier another year? And how does that go down well with the fans? Because I'll be honest with you, I think that would be a tough sell for quite a few of us as well.
Yeah, I'm sure he is aware that there are some unavoidable issues that he's going to have to take a view on. If he was throwing red meat to the base, a symbolic win would be to, I expect Rangers to bring in experienced players anyway, but one of those experienced players gets the armband, and it's a very clear, just physical, visual difference, someone else leading that team out. What difference that makes, I think, is overplayed, but as I've written about a wee bit this week, perception's real. If people think that's important, and thousands of people think that's important, then it is. It becomes a thing. It's out there in the ether, and that's for Rangers to deal with. So, I think, again, just from what I can remember from Southampton, both in the Championship side and then going up, he does love a lot of pace on the flanks, and whether Tav can do what he once did is obviously certainly up for debate. So that is something absolutely hanging over him, maybe that's the wrong way of putting it, but it's one of the things that he's going to need to address one way or t'other. Personally, don't think it's a huge drama. I wouldn't just because of his age and the miles in his legs. I'm not entirely sure he can play the part he once did, just in terms of appearances, and therefore would you want a different skipper just for that kind of reliability, which obviously Tav was once kind of famous for, really, hardly missing anything. So yeah, that will be interesting. Again, it's there. It has to be dealt with. I think he's probably got bigger issues than that at the minute to get stuck into.
Yeah, you mentioned there, I just kind of want to finish up on this in terms of your thoughts. You mentioned, obviously, his playing style at Southampton. And again, you mentioned previously about the Seagull show that we have on our Patreon site as well, that you do with David and Jack. I know that there's been a lot of conversation, and from what I've been able to kind of follow and kind of catch up on in terms of playing style, because that was something that we were critical under the last two managers, really. That we failed to be able to break teams down well in the counter attack. We failed to be able to get the ball up the park quickly, and we were so risk adverse. We just, it felt like we were always taking safer options rather than playing a slightly riskier, but balls with further momentum rather than just being able to try and pass side to side or potentially back the way. Obviously, that Southampton team will be playing in far more open games, but I'm keen to get your thoughts on how that will translate to, again, some of the more packed defences and low blocks that we'll be playing against, or Russell Martyn's team will be playing against in the vast majority of the domestic games. How do you feel that can translate, and can he shape it to try and get the same out of it, despite the fact that we'll be playing against far more bodies behind the ball?
Okay, so there's probably a few things there. My criticism at Southampton on Seagulls was he didn't have the tools to do what he did in the Championship, but continued to try and do what he did in the Championship. And I felt that was negligence. You don't have those tools, you're going to have to think of something different. And I hate that. I really don't like, in football, I don't like that. We may have to accept that those managers, the real Ancelotti type, who just say, give me, what have we got? What's the squad? Right, okay. And what are our objectives? Right, fine. Well, what's the best way of using these players? I can play different ways, whatever, but I'll just manage. I think the manager's disappearing. I think coaches are clearly far in the ascendancy. I think identity football is here and here to stay. I think it was Adam in a conversation we were having earlier the week who made the fair point that it's not just coaches, it's owners who have that identity in mind. Buying a football club's not enough. Winning's not enough. It has to be in this way. Nothing particularly new. It's just more common. And therefore, they will hire a coach to be principled and not really deviate too far from that. So that's kind of where we are, and that's just life in modern football. The risk aversion is a big thing he spoke about a lot. He wants that to dominate the ball, but also dominate without it. Really, work hard without it. But when we have, it's the courage and the bravery with the ball, which is something I've complained about, others have complained about in Rangers teams for long enough. Bravery in football is not crunching into a 50-50. It's demanding the ball in a difficult period of the game, and it's trying to do something with the ball in a difficult area of the pitch, or where the options are pretty limited, but risk reward. And that's what's lacked from Rangers teams, I think, is pretty clear, which is why in Europe, when we're more reactive and we've got more space to play in, because we're more reactive, those risks are lessened, and we can, if we're good at other things, which we have tended to be, just because of the dynamic of those games, you can get a lot more value for money there. So that's something I think he will be on. This style thing, possession. I'm not sure it's different from Rodgers. Really. I think Postecoglou was quicker, Gerrard in the 2021 season was quicker. But around that, Rangers and Celtic are going to have the ball. It's a close use of that. Tempo's an issue. But it's not a style question. It's players. Again, I'm sorry to keep coming back to this. It's players. We're going to be a possession-based side because it's fucking Rangers at home. Bravery on the ball, again, creativity, vision, tempo. That's dependent on players who have the courage to do those things and can do those things. So it's not about style. When you are one of the two sides who have well overspent or outspent, the rest of the league. You're playing against inferior opposition. What is curtailing you, what is making you scared, is the fact you play for Rangers, and the pressures are great, and that's something that maybe more of a psychological challenge for all of Martyn's critics. That's not really one of them. An excellent manager from all accounts of his clubs that he's been at. So I don't really buy the style thing. It might not be absolutely up my street, but Celtic don't seem to have an issue playing that way. They've just got the better players in the country. There might be something in that. And I think we're fixated, far, far too fixated on formations and styles when it's actually personnel within them. As I said, there's more than one way to skin a cat, Cammy. And I don't really have an issue, even though it might not be my preference, I don't have an issue with the manager having their way. They need to have the players that fit that way. And those players need to be, pretty much better than the opposition. Get that right. As I said, Martyn ball, call it what you want, will be absolutely fine in Scotland. How he adjusts to Europe, by the way, I think is an interesting factor, because that is playing a different way, and Celtic haven't very much dominant here, but can't change that. But that's been an issue in Scottish football for my lifetime. Really is, how can you be very successful, championship winning, and also changing things enough to deal with a completely different task on a Thursday or a Wednesday night or whatever. So I don't know if any of that made sense, but it's obviously something that's been circulating around. I think there's so much nonsense out there. I think I heard someone say that possession doesn't work in Scotland. Look at Celtic, they lost the cup final against Aberdeen. I mean, we're missing a bit of evidence outside of that fucking cup final. It's just, it's getting so wild now. I really wish I had the power in me to remove WhatsApp or Twitter or whatever. It's people need go and just watch the cricket or something. Take up golf for the summer. You need away from this for 2 months, man.
Yeah, it's a summer break for all of us. Do you mean let's try and use it? Yeah, listen, I totally get it. I think it speaks towards the fluidity of being able to try and change your approach, but you can only do that with the personnel. Do you know what I mean? You've got to build, and we've seen that ourselves firsthand when we've been able to get results in Europe that, by and large, we've really pulled out the bag and stutter towards being able to try and get a point when we've been playing on a Sunday, as you say, domestically. So, yeah, listen, I think it's totally valid, but that's what the focus now has to move on to, and I think that's where the bloodthirst will now start to point towards. Will be right. We need to get players in. We need to get moving on this. We understand that. So, it's going to be an interesting summer for sure. I'm trying to avoid saying an absolute overhaul because I feel like as if I'm just going to be repeating myself from the last 3 or 4 years, but we are where we are.
Yeah, a big summer for Rangers trademark, but it inescapably is, because you definitely have a manager who those players just simply will not work with what he wants to do. So, yeah, we will see a lot of change. I'm absolutely sure we will see a lot of change. It's going to take a wee while to bed in. My optimism, Cammy, just in general, just from last Friday onwards, isn't necessarily about next season. It's 3 to 5 years of just having a proper plan, a proper structure,
Some
and
sustainability would be
yeah,
lovely.
and just people that are just that wee bit more detached from the madness that I'm enveloped by and part of. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It is not going to be a quick fix, which again creates more noise and more noise. They're just going to have to be calm and see through the storm. But I'm more, as I said, more optimistic about that kind of medium rather than the immediate.
Very true. Very true. Well, listen, if you want to be able to keep up to date with all of the latest Rangers news, and as Martyn and I have just discussed, there is going to be plenty of it. You can join us on patreon.com/Heart and Hand. You'll be getting daily updates on there, as well as a plethora of other content, Rangers related, football related, and some nonsense related as well. But come and join us with a fantastic community of Rangers diehards. Thank you to Michael and Paul Myers, our executive producers. Thank you to you all for listening. As I say, it's been a great week for Rangers. However, the highlight of my week thus far has been able to do a show alongside Martyn Ramsey, the one and only. Martyn, we tend to only use you in the break glass plan whenever we need something to come on to have a moan about. It's been great to be able to use that word optimism and leave with a bit of a smile on our face.
I am famous for my optimism and my smile, Cammy. But yeah, it's been a pleasure. I just hope that we're not, said this on the update, doing
this again in November.
An unveiling show for a wee while.
Yeah, it'd be nice. As long as we don't have to do a manager dismissal show in November, that would just be lovely. Let's just try and keep it normal as well. Thanks everyone for listening. We will be back with you soon. Bye-bye.